We will now turn to our second speaker on the opposition, Emily Carver. Emily is a Conservative broadcaster, commentator and columnist, having worked in Parliament and for the IEA. She's now a regular contributor to Conservative-owned GB News and BBC Politics. Emily, you have the floor.
Thank you. Laura was speaking so quickly there that it was hard to remember all the things that you got wrong when it came to the economy. But what you did get right was that the state of economy is in a bit of a mess. And we all know that. The cost of living is very high. Inflation is rising. We spent huge amounts of money during the pandemic, essentially locking down the economy for long periods of time. Meanwhile, RMT workers, rail workers, were paid full whack, I'll have you know, and they were subsidised to a tune of 16 billion off the taxpayer. Well, not in the same way as other people who were left essentially to... It was £16 billion of taxpayers' money. Hang on, you didn't say point of information. Let me carry on. Because we were saying, right, Laura said, Alex, you're proving my point. Trade unions are not only there to bargain pay rises, are they? Alex, you yourself are possibly not self-proclaimed, but clearly a Marxist. You have political views. You have a vision of this country. You have a vision of this country. You have a vision for this country. You would like to see some sort of socialist revolution, I imagine. Yes? Yes? Yes. Yes. So when Mick Lynch goes on the media, and some people find him very charming, some people find him attractive even, he's become some kind of pin-up for a certain type of left-wing woman, Mick Lynch. And he comes on and he says, I've got no political view. I'm not a socialist or a Marxist or a communist, but he is, isn't he? No? Alex? Well, the point I'm trying to make is that trade unions are not simply there to represent the views of their members. They are also there because they have their own political agendas. And people in this room may agree with those political agendas, and that's fine. But there are many people who work in these industries, whether it's the NHS, whether it's the railways, whether it is water companies, whether it is teachers, don't actually buy into all of the political stuff that goes along with them. That is a fact. My mother was a teacher. There was a lot of unionism within the teachers when she was there. She didn't agree with half of the things that the teaching unions wanted to put forward, because at the heart of it was the aim to bring down the Conservative government. And as I say, you may agree with that. That's fair enough. Fair dues. They're not doing a particularly good job. But that is a massive point of why trade unions exist. And may I say, Laura was talking about fat cats. Yes, there are many fat cats in the business world, but there are also many fat cats in the trade union world, are there not? The leaders very much are on six-figure salaries. Head of Unison, head of Unite, head of the RMT, I believe, is on a six-figure salary, Mick Lynch himself. So they're talking about... Well, it is true. So what are they on then?
£68,000 last year was in your...
No, he doesn't. He's stated his salary. It's publicly available. It's £84,000.
Much more than any RMT worker is getting.
No, that's not true either.
Well, anyway, let's return. We can all Google what Mick Lynch earns or what Alex Gordon earns or whatever. Anyway, okay, so I wanted... Pardon? Well, that's irrelevant to trade unions, really, isn't it? Okay.
Carry on.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting a bit sort of... Yes, distracted by the shouting out, but I did the same, so I can't complain. So I wanted to challenge the assumption a little bit of the emotion, well, the assumption that's made in the motion, that being that trade unions were definitely a force for good in the past. If they're still a force for good now, then they must have been in the past. Now, if you've read your history, and I'm sure there are many history students in this room, you will know how damaging union activity was in the 70s and 80s. My parents were old enough to tell me about what it was like. That was when trade unions were at their peak, at their height of their influence and their power. I'm sure you've all heard of the winter of discontent. The dead went unburied, the lights went out, rubbish piled high, the country was gripped by miners' strikes, businesses were forced to close. No, we saw the imposition of a 3-day working week. Why? Just to avoid blackouts. So it was a pretty tough time. Thankfully, in my view, trade unions don't have the power to grind the economy to a halt. You know, even when the RMT and other railway unions went on strike, people were able to still work from home largely. It mostly affected people on low salaries, on insecure work who couldn't get to their jobs, didn't it? That was the people it affected, not people on big fat cat salaries who can work from home from their in-house office. It affected people who couldn't get to being a waiter in a bar. They couldn't get to their job. They couldn't get to their... Go on then.
This is just typical pitting working people against working people. Oh, you did...
No, I'm sorry. Go on then.
Strikers are very predominantly middle class, not working.
Yeah, I know, this is the irony as well, yes.
It's still pitting them, like the lower middle classes against the working classes, the precariat versus the proletariat. It's no different.
I know, but this is what the trade unions are, unfortunately, pitting the members that they represent against the rest of workers, because who are they asking for pay rises from? In order to pay for pay rises, no, I want to go back actually to what Laura said, because she said she painted this picture of a dire economic situation, and I would just ask, okay, you want everyone to have inflation-busting pay rises, where on earth do you think that money is going to come from? Okay, Shell Oil, right? Okay, so we've already got a 75% tax on energy companies. Do you think they're going to continue to invest in this country? Do you think they're going to continue to invest when we need it most? Anyway, going back to the 70s, going back to the 70s. God, it's like being on Politics Live. Going back to the 70s and 80s, there was quite a lot of bully boy tactics, which I imagine some of the trade union barons at the moment would like to bring back. You had flying pickets, for example, which I think Reem mentioned, where people would essentially turn up at someone else's picket line and intimidate people into not doing the job that they wanted to do, go into their workplace, and so on. As I mentioned, the Wapping dispute, trade unions held back any productivity or any progress in that industry, or they wanted to. They essentially wanted to keep very old-fashioned working practices alive, and that would have helped if they'd been successful in stopping the printing press from improving, developing, and so on. We would have been stuck in the Dark Ages, essentially. Yes, go on.
Thank you very much. You seem to very much enjoy talking about the 1970s.
Yes, I know, it's my first page.
It's a fascinating kind of period, but you're kind of conflating two sort of sets of strikes. The kind of early 70s strikes, which were obviously about getting rid of the Tory government. But the strikes during the Winter of Discontent kind of really, well, they happened under a Labour government, so it's pretty hard to kind of sustain the argument that all these unions were just kind of trying to sort of impose their own ideology on the public. That just seems to be kind of self-conscious.
Well, if we come back to the current state of affairs, now, I am by no means saying that people do not deserve a pay rise. If I could, I would click my fingers and give everyone enough money to be able to live in a big house and be able to raise a family with no hardship whatsoever. But the problem is the current economic situation, and the government's job, unfortunately, is to work in terms of trade-offs. Right, so... Right, I will continue. And of course, this will be a trigger point. The coal miners did try to preserve uneconomic coal mines. Thatcher was the great environmentalist at that time. Anyway, but what we see at the moment is unions battling on behalf of rather well-paid train drivers, actually, trying to protect backward working practices. And take the tube network, for example. I don't know if any of you are from London, but the unions were battling against all-night services, which are essential, not least for vulnerable women who want to get home late at night, if that is a concern of yours. Now, as I did say to Alex earlier, I did say that there is a little small issue of some of the militant union barons being self-proclaimed socialists, even communists. Arthur Scargill, who I'm sure is one of your icons, he was a devout Marxist backed by the Russians. I believe you also have sympathy for some of Russia, perhaps. His aim was not just to take on the employer, but the government completely. Anyway, so this political agenda of trade unions hasn't really changed. It's not something of the past. Those who represent unions may... Yes, please.
Are you aware of the fact that trade unions have to conduct ballots of their members before they take action?
I am indeed, but if...
That's rather more important than what you're saying about their political votes.
Well... Sorry, what was your point, sir? That it's democratic?
Yes, that they represent what their members...
Yeah, no. I think they can do, sometimes, certainly. But if you look at, for example, yesterday, if you look at... No, one moment. Sorry. If you... I'll let you in next. I think I'm running out of time, aren't I? Goodness me, I haven't got through any of my points. Yes, yesterday with the teachers' strikes, for example, 2 of the teachers' unions didn't meet the threshold, i.e. the teachers either decided that they didn't want to vote because they weren't bothered, or perhaps they didn't agree with striking and letting down children after 2 years of pandemic. The NEU, however, did get 48% of people voting, and 90% of those did vote in favour of strike action. So it's by no means that the trade unions necessarily represent all teachers. And I think this is a false... People think that, you know, for example, trade unions that represent NHS workers represent every single NHS worker. They don't necessarily, yes?
Are you aware that 43,000 teachers have joined the NEU since they announced the result of their strike ballot?
I am,
Those
yes.
were teachers who wanted to strike and joined the union in order to take part in strike action.
I am very aware of that, sir, but I am also very aware... I am also very aware of the fact that the trade unions were telling teachers and members of the unions not to let their head teachers know whether they were going to be coming into work. The pressure that puts on head teachers, the pressure that puts on parents of children, potentially who are even lower paid than some of the people you represent. So, you know, the problem is that we talk about pitting workers against one another. I believe that at the moment the trade unions are unfortunately pitting workers against one another, because if you attempt to racketeer pay rises out of the rest of the public when everyone is being squeezed until the pips squeak, which is what we are at the moment, we have an absolutely extraordinary tax burden, there will be consequences. Have I run out of time? Okay, well, on that note, may I take one last order from the chap over there?
Don't you think it's rather churlish to accuse nurses who haven't been on strike for 100 years and firefighters of being motivated by Marxist militancy?
No, I am not accusing the nurses. I never, ever, if you actually listen to me, I never accused nurses of being militants. I accused unions and their particular tactics of being so. Anyway, I will finish there. Thank you very much.